So, the climate. Now, we all know and we have all heard about climate change, and we all know the seriousness of climate change pertains to, well, our own planet. If we want to live here, live on this globe, live on what we call home, since the beginning of humanity itself, we have to take some drastic steps, and we all are very much aware of that. But here's something that we might not all be aware of. Where does this all begin? Where does it all come from? And who found out that climate change was a real thing? Well, the facts are stranger than fiction, so why not just jump straight into the facts? And the facts are that a company by the name of Exxon, which is one of the biggest oil companies in the world, hired a bunch of scientists in the early 1980s to figure out what would be the long-term effects of burning fossil fuels. The scientific consensus that their own personal scientists came out with was the fact that a greenhouse effect would end up taking place throughout the globe. This was right in the middle of the 1980s, and this was news that Exxon did not want to hear because of the surging boom in gas consumption throughout the globe. This was something that they never wanted to know, and this was something that they were not expecting to find out. So they went to their scientists and they said, you know what, thanks for the information, but we're going to keep doing our own thing, and why don't you keep looking into it? So at least they said that keep looking into it to the scientists. And now in 1982, the scientists came back to ExxonMobil, and they were their scientists itself, so it was all in-house. It was not something that was known to the regular people. But the scientists in 1982 came back with legitimate data, and they said that climate change would lead to sea level rise. And this was told to ExxonMobil in 1982. Exxon believed every single thing that was portrayed to them by their own scientific consensus, and as a result of which, every single offshore drilling facility that Exxon has made has ensured that it's built on these beams that further increase the height of the platform to cope for the rising sea level, which makes sense considering the fact that Exxon would do what it requires to do, what it needs to do. And putting your entire platform on a couple of extra structural beams to give it that much more height would benefit you greatly. If the sea level rises, you don't have to worry about your platform not being able to cope anymore. Here is where things went a little haywire. So, in 1982, there was an internal memo that was circulated around ExxonMobil which claimed that we need to ensue uncertainty around this research that has been brought forward by our own scientists. We know that this research cannot be contained, and we know that the results of this research will be put out there for the regular people to consume, that the research will get out there and we will be targeted. So what do? Well, Exxon decided muddy the waters, if you will. Exxon believed that the only other thing that they could do was completely denounce the whole research consensus that was formed by their own scientists. In 1988, George Bush Sr. gave a speech in which he clearly said that the severe heat wave that has killed many in the United States needs to be addressed. The fact that global warming is a real thing. He also said that it can and should be dealt with. This is 1988 George Bush Sr. What did the oil companies do? Well, their immediate reaction was freaking out. The oil companies freaked out and went all out in their disinformation campaigns. They ran paid advertisements that looked like legitimate articles, and they filled the entire media spectrum with fake propaganda. The essence of climate change is that CO2 generates a greenhouse effect that further results in warming of the Earth's atmosphere. How much more? Well, in 1997, they claimed, and by they I mean the big oil, if you would say, they claimed that the Earth was actually cooling, and global warming was not a thing that would be something that we would have to worry about. It's not something that would actually make a difference to the rest of the globe. It's not something that we have to be afraid of. It's not something that we have to put a lot of time, energy, effort, and finance behind. It was something that was just existent, but climate change has been around for millennia, so we don't have to worry about it. That was their stance, and that was completely wrong, considering the fact that their own scientists had said otherwise. Well, George Bush Jr. came into power, and the oil companies knew that this was the time that they had to make sure that this entire agenda of climate change turned into a political vendetta campaign. It turned into a political vendetta campaign in terms of, are you on the side of climate change or are you against the side of climate change? And if you are on one side, the other side is your enemy. Hence, the vendetta. The Republican Party challenged scientific debates over and over and over again. As a matter of fact, the Republican Party also had an internal memo that said that we need to make sure that all of these scientific consensus that have come out are debated upon time and time again. That we cannot just let them put out legitimate information and let people get duped. They believed that it was time for them to make sure that the waters were muddy enough that they could ensue some amount of disinformation that people would buy. That they would make their disinformation campaigns look so legitimate that people would question the actual scientific consensus. In 2017, 90% of scientific consensus stated that climate change was real. 52% of the people of the United States believed that it was overrated. Overrated was the words that were used by 52% of the people to describe climate change. They believed that it was just hyped and it was something that they would never have to worry about in their entire lifetime. Not their lifetime, neither their kids' lifetimes. Exxon joined forces with Mobil and turned into Exxon Mobil, and Rex Tillerson was appointed as the spearheader for the new $500 billion search for oil near Russia, for which Russia awarded him handsomely. But what does climate change actually do? And what can we say is similar to the climate change that we're experiencing on a regular basis? Well, let's just say that the heat trapped is similar to the heat of 400,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs that were blown up in our atmosphere every single day. Is the amount of discrepancy that is going around with it. Is the amount of heat that gets trapped every single day. So 2100 is the year where we would have spent upwards of $14 trillion to cope with climate change. 9 out of the 10 deadliest heat waves ever to be seen or witnessed by humanity throughout their existence occurred after the year 2000. 60% of wildlife has been killed since the year 1970. All because of natural climate change. Or is it natural? If it continues, a quarter of the earth by the year 2050 will face extreme droughts. As a matter of fact, 100 million trees died in California alone because of climate change. Stephen Hawking, as a matter of fact, said that if things keep going the same way, we will have to leave the earth by the end of the century in order to make sure that our civilization has a place to prosper. You see, natural cycles are common, but these drastic rates of increase is most definitely man-made. The last time we saw some drastic climate was the Ice Age, and for the Ice Age to actually thaw out and become regular climate again, it took approximately 12,000 years. Comparing the same amount of global warming that takes place today and putting that to the reach of the Ice Age, it would take only about 140 years for the ice to thaw out and for the earth to rise in heat exponentially. 12,000 years in comparison to 140 years. This discrepancy is almost 13 times. And this is only and only because of the human man-made effect that has been completely abundant throughout the globe. It's not one place, it's not one country, it's not one continent. It's everybody throughout the globe and their dependency on fossil fuels. And this is what it's done to us. Well, people say that a 2-degree rise in temperature wouldn't matter. They say that scientific consensus claims today that a 2-degree rise in temperature is what we'd be experiencing for the coming years. Time after time after time. And people are believing that 2 years for 2 degrees, it makes no difference. Well, 2 degrees is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And what difference can 2 degrees of temperature regulation mean for throughout the globe? Well, for 2 degrees of a rise in temperature for places that do not experience that rise in temperature ever, would result in drastic flooding, would result in immense wildfires, as we've seen throughout the globe, as we've seen California burning, we've seen the Australian bushfires, we've seen fires in Europe, we've seen fires in India, we've seen fires every single place in the world. As a matter of fact, even Tunguska in Siberia was burning. The northernmost forest in the world was on fire, in snow. That's how you know something is off. As a matter of fact, people get confused between what weather is and what climate is. People believe that, oh, it's cold outside today. How can it be an effect of global warming? How can global warming even be a thing? Well, I'll tell you how global warming can even be a thing, because you're getting weather and climate confused. Weather is what we experience on a day-to-day basis. It can be hot, it can be cold, it can be raining, it can be hazy, it could be anything. That's weather. An accumulated effect of said weather, and this weather pattern dictates climate. Climate is essentially what you can say is a long-term thing. And climate directly influences weather patterns. So if you believe that this weather pattern that you're experiencing now is going to affect nothing, you're sadly mistaken, because the climate is going to change. And the next weather pattern that you experience would be rather drastic than what you were used to. As a matter of fact, the easiest way to figure this out is to look at the flattest countries in the world. Bangladesh is one of the flattest countries in the world, and it is experiencing sea level rise like never before. It's losing land like never before. Because it's one of the flattest countries in the world, it stands to be the first, or amongst the first, to completely be submerged underwater if these sea level rises do not stop. According to scientific consensus, if sea levels continue to rise, we are going to lose most of our coastal cities and most of our ports. We are going to be forced to find out alternatives for something that should have never ever been done in the first place. Had they come out clean from the get-go, had they come out clean from the beginning and told us that yes, it is an actual thing that will happen, we believe that on an individual level, a lot could have been done, a lot could have been endured, a lot could have been undertaken. Person to person, people to people, just like today when we have the new Green Deal, the Green Movement, the Fridays for Future movement. There's so many movements out there that know and acknowledge the seriousness of climate change. And yet we stand here today debating amongst ourselves as to if it holds any water at all. The fact that you want to believe if it holds any water at all as a theory is sad, because certain facts and certain figures do not lie. You can argue about perception, you can argue about contemplation, but what you can't argue about is what facts dictate. People also say that solar, wind is too expensive, but that's where you're wrong again. Solar and wind have dropped in costs drastically. As a matter of fact, most new architectural projects that are coming up today depend on solar and wind more than they depend on natural fossil fuel to power their buildings, which shows that these new buildings are ready for the future, and we have to be ready for the future as well. We can no longer keep debating about the authenticity of climate change, because climate change is very real, my friends, and a quick Google search will tell you exactly what areas on the globe are going to experience it the worst. But believe you me, nobody is safe, and nobody just gets to shrug it off, because it's going to affect every single one of us, no matter where you live, no matter how high or how near the sea. It's going to affect all of us, some sooner than others, but make no mistake about the fact that it's going to come for you just like it's going to come for everyone else. And as long as you don't realize that you have to come together as a species and we have to make efforts on an individual basis, we will be losing out on more land, on more prosperity, on more gain that the earth can actually get. We will, as a matter of fact, be losing out on humanity itself. People believe that we should have less kids. People believe that we need to do something drastic. We need to start somewhere, is the bottom line. No matter what you might believe in or the steps that you might believe are too extreme to take, the fact of the matter is that every tiny little thing that you on a personal level can do to ensure that your carbon footprint is minimized is going to help immensely in the long run. And this long run is what we need to look at. We cannot look at the future without looking at tomorrow. We need to take it one day and one step at a time. Climate change is real. Make sure you join the movement. Look it up wherever you might be on the world. There is always a climate change protest, there's always ways you can benefit your own communities by making sure that a few steps are taken in your own vicinity, in your own areas, by you, your family, your friends. The least you can do right now is tell them that the facts around climate change are not to be debated, that they are real, that they hold very, 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 very high ground. And if we don't do anything about it, we will lose our planet that we have adored since the conception of mankind itself. Alright, see you guys in the next one.